What's happening, guys? This morning, just like yesterday morning, I'm up at 4 o'clock again and ready to go. And today we are doing the late and great Dostoevsky. And this guy there's this tone. He's one of those authors that you know when you're reading him. You can hear his voice, though it's inaudible. It just creates itself because he is just so illustrious, and he just has this character it shines so greatly, and you can just I love that about him. And he and Nietzsche are often compared, and I don't know why. I do it a little bit too, but they're really beyond comparison. They are just totally Dostoevsky. He has this fast pace. It's almost just he's just speaking. He's just very blunt and frank, and he's not holding back anything. It's almost like it's just some unfiltered child that is just saying whatever comes to mind, and yet it's so great. He's totally uninhibited. And then someone like Nietzsche is he's an aphorist, and each sentence is bulky. There's a lot to be dissected with each phrase and his choice of words. And they're both like that in their own ways, but I definitely notice reading Dostoevsky, because I read Nietzsche, I read Nietzsche more, and he says it, you have to read him slow, philologically, or else you're missing the point. But with Dostoevsky, one of my friends said he's like a motorcycle on the highway going full speed, and I agree. It's just, he takes you, and you're just going where he goes. He's just got you locked in. And there's so many passages that I would like to go over in this book. It's Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, by the way. But there's one in particular that I think I may have to confine myself to, because it's about 10 pages, and that's pretty weighty for a video like this, which I try to keep to 30 minutes. So we're going to go to that first, and if I have time, I will try to get to the other ones. But just in a nutshell, I'm almost done the book, but I have only 2 chapters left. Basically, I can say that it's about him going to Europe. He's Russian, and it was late in his life. It was 1862. I'm not sure how old exactly he was when he went to Europe, but he was one of those boys who always dreamed of it. Europe is so fantastic. We Russians look to them, and we know Europe better than our own because, frankly, Russia is not interesting, and Europe is, and they shape us, they civilize us. They're progressive, their progress rubs off on us, da-da-da-da. And he goes there to get a first-hand glimpse of this progress. And essentially, all he can do is mock it. He does not see the progress that the progressives are saying that they have made. And that's just how Dostoevsky is. He is not, if in a Socratic kind of fashion, he will go after those people who claim the truth of something and just, without any regard for their contentment, will just say what's on his mind, and that's why he's so great. But what I'm about to read, I read this in a different copy, wherein it wasn't Winter Notes on Summer Impressions, it was just, this was extracted from it and put in kind of an appendix thing. I think it was a copy of Notes from Underground. I gave it to my friend because he came over one day and I just gave him some books. But when I first read it, it was amazing because it's so true. So without further ado, I'm just going to get to it. The Westerner speaks of fraternity as of a great motivating force of humankind, and does not understand that it is impossible to obtain fraternity if it does not exist in reality. What is to be done? Fraternity must be obtained at any cost. But as it happens, it is impossible to create fraternity, for it creates itself, comes of itself, exists in nature. But in French nature, as in Occidental nature in general, it is not present. You find there instead a principle of individualism, a principle of isolation, of intense self-preservation, of personal gain, of self-determination of the I, of opposing this I to all nature and the rest of humankind as an independent, autonomous principle, entirely equal and equivalent to all that exists outside itself. Well, fraternity could scarcely arise from such an attitude. Why? Because in fraternity, in true brotherhood, it is not the separate personality, not the I, which should be concerned with its right to equality and equilibrium with everything else, but rather this everything else which comes of its own volition to the individual who is demanding his rights, to the individual I, and of itself, without his asking, should recognize him as possessing the same value and the same rights as it does, i.e., as everything else on earth. And what is more, this demanding, rebellious individual ought first of all to offer the I, to offer himself entirely to society, not only without demanding any rights, but, on the contrary, offering these up unconditionally to society. But the Western personality is not accustomed to acting in this manner. It fights for what it wants. It demands its rights. It desires to separate. Well, fraternity will not flourish in such an atmosphere. Of course, there could be a regeneration, but this would require thousands of years, for such ideas must combine with the flesh and blood before becoming reality. What, you will say to me, must be one without personality in order to be happy? Does salvation lie in impersonality? To the contrary, I say, a person must not only not lose his personality, but must actually attain a much greater degree of individuality than now exists in the West. Understand me, voluntary, fully conscious self-sacrifice utterly free of outside constraint, sacrifice of one's entire self for the benefit of all, is in my opinion a sign of the supreme development of individuality, of its supreme power, absolute self-mastery and freedom of will. Voluntarily to lay down one's life for others, to crucify oneself, or be burnt at stake for the sake of all. All that is possible only in the most advanced stage of individuality. A highly developed individuality, completely convinced of its right to individuality, no longer fearing for itself, can do anything else by virtue of its individuality, i.e., can serve no other purpose through it than to give itself entirely to others, in order that others too may be equally autonomous and happy. That is the law of nature. Normally man tends in that direction. But there is one hair in this picture, a very fine strand of hair, which, if it finds its way into the mechanism, will destroy everything. Namely, if there exists the slightest calculation on behalf of self-interest, all is lost. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, but I just want to point out this self-sacrifice idea. Dostoevsky was himself a Christian, and if there's one thing that I think that I value most about the Christian tradition, about the story of Christ, is his crucifixion, that idea of sacrificing oneself entirely for everybody else, void of the concern for your own benefit. That just giving yourself up entirely is, I agree, it's the highest manifestation of individuality. Because every other form of it that wants its sustenance and to continue on, frankly, in no way distinguished or remarkable compared to everybody else. I mean, what is that? What's the point of living on if you have just foregone this heroic potential? You could be the hero of the day. You could save everybody by giving yourself entirely. And while that's hard as hell to do, I think all of us should in our own way aspire to do it. And maybe that doesn't mean crucifixion, but maybe, how about honesty? How about just doing what Dostoevsky did, and for that matter Nietzsche, and all the people who spoke their particular truth. And when you do that, it should be very particular. It shouldn't sound like anybody else. You stand out. Christ was the one who, and he'll say this later, all for one for all is this debate. And he sees in the Western world too much all for one and not enough one for all. We're giving people the security and the comfort and the space necessary for them to cultivate their individuality, and they're not doing it. They just dwell in comforts and think money is the ultimate value, and so on. I'm going to keep going. Namely, if there exists the slightest calculation on behalf of self-interest, all is lost. For example, I come to sacrifice my entire self for others. Well, it is necessary that my sacrifice be complete and definitive and without any thought of gain, without the slightest thought that once I have offered my entire self to society, society will in turn offer itself to me. One must make the sacrifice in just this spirit. One must give all and even desire consciously to get nothing in return, to obligate no one. How can this be done? It is just like trying not to think of a polar bear. Try this experiment on yourself. Try not to think of a polar bear, and you will see that the cursed animal keeps returning to your mind. That's a really familiar psychological trick for anybody who has taken psychology classes, or just among people in general. I don't think a lot of people know that this is where it came from. What is to be done then? Well, there is nothing you can do about it. Rather, it must happen of itself. It must be present in one's nature. It must be an unconscious ingredient of the nature of the race. In a word, if there is to be a foundation for brotherhood and love, there must be love. One must be drawn instinctively toward brotherhood, community, and harmony. One must be drawn despite the nation's age-old sufferings, despite the barbaric coarseness and ignorance rooted deeply in it, despite slavery since time immemorial, despite the invasions of foreigners. In short, the need for a brotherly community must be in the nature of man. It must have been born within him, or else he must have assimilated the habit through the centuries. If we transposed fraternity into rational conscious language, of what then would it consist? It would consist of this: each individual, of his own accord, without any external pressure or thought of profit, would say to society, "We are strong only when united. Take all of me, if you need me. Do not think of me when you make your laws. Do not worry about me in the least. I cede all my rights to you and beg you to dispose of me as you see fit. My greatest joy is to sacrifice everything to you, without hurting you by so doing. I shall annihilate myself. I shall melt away, if only your brotherhood will last and prosper." But the community should answer, "You offer us too much. What you offer we have no right to refuse. For you say it would be your greatest joy. But what can we do? when constant concern is for your happiness? Take everything that is ours, too. Constantly and with all our might, we shall struggle to increase your personal freedom and self-revelation. You need fear no enemies now, among men or in nature. We are all behind you. We guarantee your safety. We watch eternally over you. For we are brothers. We are all your brothers, and we are many and strong. Therefore be bold and tranquil. Fear nothing and count on us. It's what it is. I mean, we have created this condition where, I see it myself, I experience it myself, and things could definitely be worse. But we give people this space, and most of the time, people, just from what I can extrapolate, it seems like they just go on their phones or watch television or eat junk food, or they band with other people who do all of those things, and nobody is building themselves at all. They are just totally trapped up in money for one, and pleasures for the other thing, like Huxley's Brave New World, which essentially is what we're living in more and more. And nobody has at all this consciousness of, I'm an individual, and it actually matters what I do, and it matters what people think of me, and that I am indebted to them and not them to me, that I have something I have to do for them, rather than feed off of all of the comforts that come from them and from their work. But then he goes on to talk about socialism here, which I think is useful. After this, naturally, there is no partitioning to worry about. Everything will be shared of itself. Love one another, and you shall have all of this. There is a utopia for you, gentlemen. Everything is based on feelings, on nature, not on reason. Why? This actually humbles the reason. What do you think? Is this a utopia or not? What, then, can the socialist do, if there is no principle of brotherhood in the Westerner, but, on the contrary, an individualist, isolationist instinct which stands aloof and demands its rights with sword in hand? Observing that there is no fraternity around, the socialist tries to talk fraternity into people. For lack of fraternity, he tries to mold, to create fraternity. To make rabbit stew, you first of all need a rabbit, but there is no rabbit available, i.e., no nature capable of brotherhood, no nature which believes in brotherhood, no nature naturally attracted to brotherhood. The frantic socialist sets desperately to work on the future fraternity, defining it, calculating its size and weight, enticing you with its advantages, explaining, teaching, telling of the profit each stands to gain from the fraternity, and just how much each will win. He determines what each personality will look like and what burden each will represent, and determines in advance the division of earthly wealth, what part each one will merit, and how much each in return must pay to the community at the expense of his individuality. But what kind of fraternity will it be if they divide in advance and determine how much each merits and what each one must do? However, the formula one for all and all for one has been proclaimed. Admittedly, it was possible to conjure up a better one, especially since the formula was taken bodily from a book we all know. But they began to apply this formula in real life. Within 6 months, the fraternity brothers had dragged Cabet, the founder of the community, to court. The Fourierists, it is said, have taken the last 900,000 francs of their assets and are still struggling to organize a philanthropy. They are having no success. There is undeniably much seductiveness in the idea of living purely according to the principle of reason, if not of fraternity, i.e., in living well, with everyone protecting you and demanding in return only work and harmony. But this brings in another enigma. It seems that the man is completely secure. They promise to give him food and drink and find work for him, and all they ask in return is a drop of his personal freedom for the common weal. Just one little drop. But a man will not live even on this basis, for the little drop is hard to surrender. It seems to him, stupid man that he is, that the community is a prison and that he will be better off all by himself, because that way he is free. Guilty. It's the nature for the Brotherhood is not there, like he said. I mean, I feel that in myself. I have this inclination more to go away from people than I do to combine with them and to associate with them, for the most part, because, I mean, for me, I feel like they drag me down. It's when you spend time with people who are not on this mission of individuality, of cultivating themselves in a formidable manner, then just being around them will bring you down and make you more shallow, I think. But the nature is not there, and that's a big point that he makes, and I'm guilty. And in freedom he is beaten. He can find no work. He dies of hunger, and he has no freedom at all. But no, the eccentric fellow imagines that he is happier when free. Naturally, there remains for the socialist nothing but to throw up his hands and tell him that he is immature, a fool and a baby, and that he does not understand what is good for him. That an ant, a mute, insignificant ant, is more intelligent than he because in the anthill everything runs so smoothly. Everything is so well regulated, everyone is well fed and happy, and each one knows his task. In short, man is still a long way from the anthill. The ant's a really good analogy because the socialist experiment that forces brotherhood, because that's what they had to do. He said that there was no nature there, and the socialists, all they ever tried to do was to impose it, and he's saying that that does not work. And the ant is a good analogy because you have to dehumanize men for this kind of brotherhood, and that's an artificial one. It's not coming from within, and that's the only way it can work. And so how do we make that work? You cannot coerce men into it. Each several, independent, singular man has to feel it within him that I am for these people. I will do anything for them. If you have a dictator telling you that, you're just gonna, well, maybe not hate the people, but you're definitely gonna hate him, and you're not going to want to as much as you may be forced to associate and deal with the people directly. In other words, socialism is feasible, not only in France. And driven to the final stage of desperation, the socialist ends by proclaiming liberté, égalité, fraternité, ou la mort, which means, those are kind of words that sound like the English ones: liberty, equality, fraternity or brotherhood, or death. Well, there is nothing left to say, and the bourgeois triumphs conclusively. And if the bourgeois triumphs, it means that the formula of Sayes has been literally and completely realized. And if the bourgeois is everything, which comes from his Abel Sayes quote, what is the tierra, which is what is the third estate, or the people in general, everything. And Dostoevsky here kind of equates the bourgeois with the people, which is interesting. And the bourgeois, if the bourgeois is everything, why is he embarrassed? Why is he ill at ease? What does he fear? All the others have made fools of themselves, and all the others have proven destitute before him. Formerly, in the time of Louis Philippe, for instance, the bourgeois was not at all so embarrassed or frightened, and yet he reigned then too. Yes, but at that time he was still fighting. He felt that he had enemies, and settled accounts with them once and for all, with his rifle and bayonet on the June barricades. But the battle ended, and the bourgeois suddenly saw that he was alone on earth, that there no longer was anything superior to him, that he was the ideal, that it was no longer his business to persuade the world that he was the ideal, but rather, as the incarnation of supreme beauty and human perfection, to pose tranquilly and majestically before the entire world. You can readily see that this was an embarrassing position. Napoleon III delivered them. He was for them an angel from heaven, the only solution to their difficulties, the only possibility of the day. Since that moment, the bourgeois has been prospering, paying a frightful price for his prosperity, and fearing everything precisely because he has attained everything. Once one has attained everything, it is most distressing to lose it all. The moral, my friends, is that he who prospers most fears most. Please do not snicker. Just look at the bourgeois of today. What this comes down to is the Aboulsaye quote. That was, I'm trying to remember when in relation it was to the French Revolution, but it was around that time. And he was saying this because, obviously, as we can all observe, they were sick of the monarchy and the absolute rule of the monarchy and its ally, the Catholic Church, I believe. And the people wanted to be the rule. They had the mass quantity and the influence enough at that point, dissimilar to times in the past when it was more tribal. There was less of a dense mass of people that could overthrow their rule. But eventually, with the development of cities and increasing human reproduction, we find ourselves now in mass society, and given the right amount of unsettledness or just kind of disarray, we could band together and overthrow our rule. I would say today we're more distracted than that. We have things to take our mind away from the tyranny of the state. But they did not have that in 1789. And so once the people became the ideal, as Aboulsaye said, what is the tiers-état? Everything. What has it been hitherto? Nothing. He's saying that the people have been nothing when they should be everything. They should have the ruling power. And so Dostoevsky goes to Europe and he sees kind of the aftermath of that whole uproar. He sees a people who had stripped themselves of the monarchy, and then it was reinstituted by Napoleon III, and everyone just thought it was kind of embarrassing what they just went through. They thought that they had found the finality of civilizational progress in themselves. They thought that they had reached the climax. And that's what all these progressives are saying. So Dostoevsky was around at a time where you have the Communist Manifesto authored, you have John Stuart Mill, Thomas Buckle, you have all the philosophes in French, and they're all boasting, oh, we are rational creatures, and we have reached the penultimate or the ultimate state of consciousness, and we are able to self-govern ourselves. We are smart people. And if you just read any of Dostoevsky's books, it's almost like they're aimed directly against that we are not nearly as rational and self-composed creatures as the rationalists and the progressivists would like to make us out to be. That's one of the things I love about him. He has an acute understanding of the unpredictability of our nature, our want for freedom. That even if we were capable of living in a harmonious, settled, corresponding way where I'm not going to take the knife to you anymore, I won't cheat you out of anything. If we still had the possibility to create chaos, we would. Just because we do not want that robotic, totally predictable life. He knows the irrational side of man. And I would say he speaks heavily through that, and I love when authors do that. I'm not big on the whole dialectic and this is that, and therefore it follows that this is that, and just trying to find truth through reason and word. It's not my thing, and he doesn't play that game at all. He's just speaking from the heart, the conscience, from the anger, from the instinct. He's speaking from it all. He's speaking as a whole human being, and that is why Dostoevsky is awesome. And I think I'm going to end it there. And I do want to say one more thing just about the all for one, one for all thing. I botched a Book of Matthew quote yesterday, but I have one that kind of pertains to it for this. Sic luceat lux vestra bona opera ut videant vestra. Oh, sic luceat lux. Sic luceat lux vestra coram hominibus ut videant vestra bona opera. I got it. I almost forgot it, and that would have been really embarrassing. But what does that mean? Shineth thine light before men, that they may see your good works. And I think that we all need to have that for this society, which is relatively stable. I mean, we have our downsides, but we need to have that. It is a kind of sense of duty. There's something about me that is intrinsically mine, and I need to bring it out. Call it your voice, whatever it is, your mission. We need to bring it out from our nature. Or if you're more metaphysical or spiritual, whatever the word, something beyond our nature. We need to transcend our nature by means of it. And we need to display that before men. That's really the only way this whole brotherhood thing can work, is if we give ourselves voluntarily. And you see that in Christ. And I think that's something he's always trying to communicate. I'm going to leave it there, guys. Thank you for tuning in again. Shineth thine light.